I didn't plan the note. I didn't ask the jazz trio to hush or the maitre d' to fetch an extra chair or for a room of strangers to watch my son try to swallow his pride. But there he was in a navy suit he could barely afford eyes wet, holding a folded slip that said in block letters, "Read this out loud." He opened it with the same hands that once carried my tool bucket. His voice cracked. "I'm partnering with your company because of your father's character." The room went still, like a pipe when the water finally stops hammering. That's the ending everybody remembers. The beginning was quieter, citrus cleaner in the air, hot oil from the kitchen, a drip you could hear if you knew how to listen. I was just a union plumber on the night list, UA Local 392, driving my old Ford E350 down Vine Street with primer on my cuffs and a rigid 14-inch wrench on the seat. The Walnut and Rye, a white tablecloth place in Over the Rhine, had called about a slow leak near the service corridor. Angle stops sweating, the hostess said, "Our floor guy's nervous about the wood." I told her 20 minutes and meant it. Cincinnati was doing its Friday night things, storefronts, glowing bus brakes, sighing couples leaning into their coats. I parked in the alley. A restaurant sells mood. You don't park a ladder in the middle of a mood. I signed the work order, nodded to a busser carrying a stack of plates, taller than his hope, and followed damp footprints to a utility sink that had done nothing wrong except get old. It was a simple fix. Pan under the trap supply, shut swap a cracked PEX line for a short copper stub with a shark bite. Wipe it dry with a bar towel. Hands know before the head does. When I stood, my knees popped the way 69-year-old knees do. That mix of citrus and PVC cement sat in the back of my throat like a memory you can't spit out. That's when I saw him. Dan stood by the host stand in a crisp suit jaw, tight checking his watch like it owed him money. He hadn't spotted me yet. He was busy looking important for a client, a neat woman with a charcoal skirt and a purse parked on her lap like it might bolt. Pride kicked in my chest the way it always does, the old reflex of a father catching his boy in the wild doing adult things. I wiped my hands on a rag and took one step closer. He turned. The look arrived before the words, the same look I'd seen at his high school career day when he'd asked me not to wear my name patch shirt. "Don't be you right now." "Do your job," he said under his breath. "Don't act like you know me." A man can get used to crawl space heat and January roofs. He never gets used to that particular cold. I nodded once. Arguing in a dining room is worse than a drip you don't tighten, so I meant to fade back into the corridor and let him have his evening. Life as usual had other plans. The maitre d' hustled over. "Sir Chef says there's pooling by the private room. Might be connected." "Let me see," I said. My voice was steady. My chest wasn't. The private room door had frosted glass and a brass handle that clicked like a good pen. The jazz brushes in the main room whispered across the snare. At the baseboard, the paint felt cool and slightly damp. Somewhere a line was weeping. I slid out my hand lamp, chased the glint, found a bead forming at a compression fitting small enough to ignore if you didn't love floors. I snugged it a half turn, then a hair more, laid a towel, waited. Dry. When I stood up, a compact man in his early 50s was there, neat part tie the color of cranberry sauce. The smoothness of someone who moves things with a phone call. His eyes landed on my face and widened like a porch light flicking on. "Ray Wright," he said, hand already out. "Yes, sir," I said, trying to place him. "You came to our Sharonville warehouse Christmas Eve 2 years ago," he said, warmth rising in his voice. "Park Logistics. The boilers were dead and the sprinkler main was about to blow. You kept our heat on. You wouldn't take a dime. The night came back road salt on my windshield, cardboard coffee from a vending machine, a foreman who cried when the red trouble lights went dark. I shrugged. Just did what needed doing." He laughed through his nose like men do when they're fighting off sentiment. "Linda will want to say hello." He tipped his chin toward the private room. "She's my boss." At the host stand, Dan pretended not to stare. The client eased her purse to the side. The temperature of the room shifted the way air does before a summer storm pressure, building something about to break. "Name's Peter," the man said, gripping my hand with both of his. "I can't believe it's you." "It's me," I said, and heard how small I'd made it. Peter gestured toward the door like an usher. "Come on, you should meet Linda properly." A man on a job should keep to the job. I believe that. I also believe in finishing what you start, and sometimes what you start isn't just pipes. I glanced at Dan. He gave me the tiniest shake of the head, a gnat flick. I went anyway. The private room smelled like steak and good decisions. The jazz hush settled. A woman with steel gray hair and steady eyes rose from her chair, Linda Park, and her smile warmed the space between us. "Mr. McKenna," she said, offering her hand. "You saved my Christmas." I didn't know what to do with the rag in my other hand, so I tucked it into my back pocket like a schoolboy. "Ma'am," I said, "glad those lines held." Out in the dining room, a fork fell and chimed against tile. I felt Dan's stare on my back like a draft under a door. Peter pulled a chair as if I belonged there. I didn't sit. Not yet. "Sit a minute," Linda said gently. "You're part of tonight." "I'm on the clock," I said. "So are we," she smiled. "And character keeps better time than sales." Peter chuckled. The line would have sounded like polish from anybody else. From her, it landed like a level on a board true. I sat on the edge enough to be polite. Dan appeared at the doorway, smile tight. "We're actually in the middle of something," he told Linda, eyes never touching me. "We can talk software." "We will," Linda said. "First, I wanted to thank the man who kept 300 families warm when the grid let us down." I didn't have a speech. I never do. I said the thing I always say. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Linda nodded. "That line keeps the water running and the heat on. It also holds up warehouses and companies and everything sitting on top of them." The hostess passed, eyes flicking to me with the small respect working people recognize. The busser I'd nodded to earlier mouthed "thank you" like I'd tipped him a secret. Somewhere a jazz chord hung in the air, undecided. Dan cleared his throat. "If we could get back to—" "Soon," Linda said. She pulled a legal pad close, wrote a few lines, folded the page, and slipped it beneath a packet of printed contracts. "One small condition before we sign." Dan's smile twitched. Mine didn't move. I've seen 1,000 conditions, bad flanges, kinked lines, stripped threads. They all give with the right touch. I didn't know it then, but that little folded sheet was the valve the whole night had been waiting on. It would turn and everything behind it, pride pressure past, would finally move. I didn't touch the folded note. You don't spin a valve until you know the pressure behind it. People think plumbing is parts. It's timing. Turn too soon and you blow a line. Wait, the hammer stops and the water behaves. So I waited and listened. The room spoke without words, jazz brushes linen, whisper a kitchen door thumping. Under it, my heart doing the old two-step it does when a memory walks in wearing work boots. Folks think a man like me is born with a wrench. Truth is, I started with a broom at 15, sweeping copper shavings off a shop floor on Montgomery Road. Harlan, barrel-chested and mint gum breath, taught me. "Don't fear crawl spaces," he said. "Fear bosses who think work is beneath them." He died paid up with the hall and square with his neighbors. That's the measure I kept. UA Local 392 took me at 19. I married Mary the next summer. She wore a yellow dress to the courthouse because her mama said white was for braggers. Mary was a kindergarten aide who could calm a room full of 5-year-olds with a hand-washing song. When she laughed, you believed rent would get paid and transmissions would hold. We built a life out of enough. Dan came 4 summers later, my ears and her eyes a cry that could cut copper. Saturdays were pancakes reds on the radio and trips to Ace for washers we didn't need just to walk the aisles. I kept envelopes in the freezer, tuition braces, rainy day. When they were empty, Mary tucked a note inside someday. Someday arrived in pieces, Christmas Eve calls Sunday, leaks terrible coffee and vans, naps under streetlights. We said no to Florida and yes to a used minivan. We bought a Norwood house with a basement that breathed like an old dog. I replaced every angle stop and felt like I'd tuned a piano. Then came the small cruelties. High school career day. Dan asked me to speak. I wore my cleanest name patch and brought a new crescent wrench to pass around. I talked about water pressure like weather and heat like kindness. You can't see but feel. The kids asked real questions. Dan smiled thin. In the hall, he whispered, "Maybe next time." "Don't wear the shirt. Parents' weekend at Ohio State Park, 3 blocks away." "Dad." "Optics." I shrugged and parked. Mary got sick slow, the kind that steals calendars, 1 appointment at a time. We sold the minivan, said yes to casseroles, learned nurses' names. I kept working because pipes don't wait for grief. The day she left the boiler at St. Bartholomew's, hiccuped. I fixed it on muscle memory and cried at a yellow light home. After Mary, I held tight to what didn't wobble: church rummage, sales, Little League dugouts, the vocational program at Cincinnati State. I mentored 3 apprentices, paid 2 exam fees when payday didn't stretch. A bakery on Madison sent a framed thank you after the 2021 cold snap when I kept their ovens warm. Every Christmas since a box of powdered sugar donuts shows up on my porch. Meanwhile, Dan shot upward Ohio State software lanyards and stand-ups nouns like roadmap and pipeline that meant something different than mine. I didn't follow the jargon, but I knew the look when he smoothed his tie and filed me under maintenance. That look had teeth. So when I'd spotted him at Walnut and Rye under soft lamps, I was ready to be a shadow. A man should let his boy be a man. But there's a difference between giving space and being erased. Watching him pretend my name patch was a stain that pricked something old and sore. Mr. McKenna, Linda said again, voice steady as freight on a good track. Peter stood at her shoulder, pleased like a man who'd found a piece he needed. Dan hovered at the threshold, pretending to be necessary. We have slides, he told her. Architecture. Slides don't keep pipes from bursting, she said, not unkind. The room heard the truth. I took the chair for real. The cushion sighed. Lemon oil and pepper lived in the table. I set my hands palm down so I wouldn't fidget and left a faint map of old scars on the linen. Linda asked simple questions the way smart people do. How long in the hall ever take apprentices? What do you do when a customer can't afford the fix? 45 years, I said. Yes, ma'am, 3, 2 stuck, 1 went electrician. I still talk to him. And you make sure they can bathe and flush, then you let the invoice ride until taxes come back. You don't let babies sit in cold water. Peter nodded. Day after that freeze, we had a senior center down. Ray showed with space heaters while we bled the lines. He grinned. He's got receipts I wish we issued. Receipts, Linda repeated, tallying. Her eyes moved to Dan like a level settling on a board. Dan's smile thinned. We can scope a proof of concept in 2 sprints, he hurried. Integrations with your TMS and... Linda raised a hand, teacher calm. We'll get there. I believe in software. I also believe in knowing who answers a phone at midnight. She tapped the folded page with 1 nail. Sometimes the best SLAs aren't printed. He looked at the paper like it might bite. Arithmetic ran across his forehead quota, rent a bigger apartment in Oakley, a boss pinging his phone. I remembered our freezer envelopes. I remembered Mary's someday. Dad, he said without looking at me, maybe you should get back to, you know. I know, I said. But Linda wasn't done. Ray, if you weren't here, we'd still sign. Your son's platform will help us. Since you are here, I need him to hear something while the room is listening. She slid the page out like a dealer revealing a card and rested her fingertip on it. A condition, yes, but not the kind he thinks. I've replaced 1,000 gaskets. Always there's the part that doesn't show the washer under the nut, the O-ring under the bonnet. Without it, everything leaks no matter how pretty the trim. In that moment, I knew the paper under Linda's hand was that hidden washer. If Dan heard it right, he might hold under pressure. If he didn't, some leaks you fix, some houses you move out of. I kept my mouth shut. That was my job now. Dan kept his eyes on the paper like it was a snake. I could see the math sliding behind his pupils, quota bonus rent image. He dressed the part, navy jacket, pocket square, folded like a decision watch that caught every chandelier. He had the stance of a man who thinks leaning forward makes the future arrive sooner. It reminded me of those plastic compression fittings folks buy at the big box to save a call fine for a minute. Then one day they let go and flood the laundry room. Push too hard, pretend too much, and something pops. Linda didn't rush. She set her pen across the top of the folded page and glanced at Peter. Give us 5 minutes, she said. No question mark. Peter nodded and slid out, easing the door until the latch kissed home. The jazz brushes outside drew a soft circle that held the room like a bowl. Dan, she said, tell me who you are without your deck. He went into a sprint. Enterprise AE, 7 years in logistics tech. I run multi-stakeholder deals, align value. Drivers own the roadmap. Stop, she said, not unkind. That's what you do. Who are you? Who taught you how to keep promises when it rains? His jaw moved. He looked at me and then didn't. Our team delivers. Because she waited. He had nothing you could hang a coat on. Silence pooled where a story should sit. Linda turned to me. Ray, can you tell me about the night in Sharonville? Peter remembers the heat. I remember a sound pipes crying. I took a breath. The private room smelled like seared steak and lemon oil. On Christmas Eve 2 years back, it had smelled like wet cardboard and old dust. The main had been flirting with freezing all day, I said. They'd run portable heaters, but they were pointed wrong. I found a kinked line feeding the sprinkler riser, bled it wrapped what needed wrapping, and babysat the boiler till the red light went quiet. Foreman brought me a coffee from a machine that hated people. We watched the thermometer climb together like it was a miracle. Why wouldn't you take payment, she asked. I did, I said. He paid me in peace. We all got what we needed. She smiled a quiet smile that left the corners of her eyes unchanged, like she'd been training her face not to scare skittish people. Peter didn't make that up, she said to Dan. He told me the same thing Monday morning. Guy refused hazard pay, left before we could thank him, said Christmas Eve didn't care about invoices. Dan's shoulders dipped a fraction. He cleared his throat. Look, Ms. Park Linda, what we're talking about here is digitizing your capacity planning, predictive ETAs, driver-friendly portals. You'll see a 12–18% improvement in... Do you know your father's union number? She said, tilting her head. Do you know the names of his apprentices? He froze in a small, honest way. No. Do you know what an angle stop is? She asked, not to trap him, but to hold a light where the truth hid. Water shut off under a sink, I said to spare him the scramble. When they sweat, they ruin floors. I tapped the table with a knuckle. Easy to miss if you're looking at candles. She nodded. I don't need my reps to be plumbers. I need them to respect the people who keep our buildings from drowning. She tapped the folded page again. We'll sign, but I'm buying character, not polish. The maitre d' cracked the door and slipped in the way a man does who knows money without worshiping it. Apologies. Chef says we have a drip at table 12 again. We've put a tray down. Let me look, I said, rising. Dan made a small strangled sound. Dad, please. Sir, the maitre d' added, I can comp desserts if we can't solve it. Save the sugar, I said. Let's solve it. We stepped into the main room. Linen glowed under candles. A couple in their 70s held hands over chowder like teenagers, wedding rings bright. I knelt at the baseboard by table 12, felt damp with the back of my fingers, listened like you listen for babies breathing. The compression fitting I'd snugged earlier had seated fine. The bead traced farther along the run turned a corner, disappeared behind a panel. I popped the panel, traced the line with my light, found the culprit, a tired ferrule in a tight spot. The kind of fix that takes fingers you trust. Can I help, the busser whispered. He had the hopeful look every apprentice wears on day one. Hold the light, I said. I palmed a new ferrule and nut from my pouch, eased the line free with that half turn that lives in your bones after 45 years, swapped the ring, tightened to feel not a quarter turn more. The drip stopped. I dried it, waited, breathed with it. Dry stayed dry. We stood. The busser's grin lit up like a pilot light. A couple at the next table clapped once, the tiny kind of clap people do when they're trying not to be rude about being grateful. One of the cooks leaned out from the kitchen, pass towel on his shoulder, and gave me a chin-up salute. The hostess mouthed, thank you. I whispered to the busser, if it sweats again, don't chase the bead. Back up a fitting and think upstream. Drips tell stories. Yes, sir, he said, chin high. We returned to the private room. Dan had moved the contracts into a neat stack like arrangement could outrun reality. Linda watched me sit, watched the maitre d' set a water glass at my place without asking. Little things, all of them louder than speeches. Dan, she said, we're going to finalize tonight. Before we do, I'd like you to read something for your team, for me, and for the room. She slid the folded page toward him and rested a fingertip on it. You can say no. Your company still wins the deal. But if you refuse, I'll know what kind of partner I'm choosing. He looked at the door as if a better hallway might appear. His phone buzzed and went quiet. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then finally lifted the paper like it weighed more than paper. Now, he asked. Now, she said softly. He didn't unfold it. He stared at the crease like a horizon he couldn't cross and set it back down. Before I do, he said to Linda, trying to bargain, will you tell me why this matters? Why my father matters to this decision? Because buildings don't care about your pitch, she said. They care if the heat stays on. Because the people who keep our doors open deserve to sit at our tables. Because the last time a crisis came, a man who smelled like Premier showed up, did the work, and left without asking for a LinkedIn post. That's the kind of reliability I buy. He winced at smelled like primer. Pride and shame fight inside men like two tomcats. One wins, but the scratches stay. He took a breath that rattled a little. Okay, he said. Okay. The door opened a crack. Peter's face hovered in the gap, calm as a good foreman. "We're fine," Linda told him. The door clicked shut again, brushes swishing the world back together. "Red," she said kindly. Dan unfolded the paper with hands that had once carried my 5-gallon bucket down steps faster than I liked. His thumb left a small, clean half-moon on the corner, like a new gasket pressed into place. He swallowed. He started to read. I felt something unclench along my ribs, not triumph, more like a backed-up line finally breathing again. The room seemed to lean in, not nosy, just human. You could hear the ice settle in a glass at the next table. You could smell pepper and citrus in the faint, sharp honesty of PVC cement. My father-in-law used to say God lives in plumbing and what holds in, what flows in what we fix because it's right. Dan blinked, eyes shining. The first line left his mouth thin and true. He read the first line like a man stepping onto ice he wasn't sure would hold. "I'm partnering with your company because of your father's character." The words didn't echo. They landed. You could feel the room's attention settle the way water finds level. A fork set down. A chair leg squeaked and then went still. The jazz trio outside hit the softest brush roll I'd ever heard, like a heartbeat someone wanted to protect. Dan swallowed. I watched his throat move the same way I used to watch the boiler gauge creep up out of the danger zone, slow, stubborn, inevitable. He looked at Linda as if to ask if that was enough. She nodded to the paper, one fingertip resting on wood like a meter pin. "There are 4 more, she said quietly. "For you, not me." He glanced at me half a second of my boy at 6, the one who once dragged my tool bucket down the porch steps, and told the neighbor my dad fixes the water at church so the grandmas can wash their hands. Then the man came back, the one who had names for things that lived in slides. He read, "Please donate your first commission check to a trade scholarship in Ray McKenna's name at Cincinnati State." His voice thinned and steadied like solder heating to flow. A busser paused just outside the door, holding a tray at hip level, head tilted. Peter's shadow shifted under the frosted glass. Linda said nothing. She didn't need to. The request sat on the table like an honest tool, useful and a little heavy. I felt my ears get warm. I remembered Mary in her yellow dress saying white was for braggers. I pictured her, now one elbow on the counter at home chin, in her hand smiling that half smile that meant a decision had been made for us and we'd live with it. Dan tapped the paper with one finger, a little nervous metronome. "Is that binding?" he asked too fast and winced at his own voice. "Only if you want to be the man who keeps this partnership," Linda said. "No heat, a statement. I don't need the receipt for my files. I need the act in your bones." He used to tap like that in middle school when we practiced spelling lists. I'd cover the page with my hand and say, "Look at me, not the words." He never did like being watched while he was figuring out how to be right. He glanced again at the door as if there were more oxygen outside. He went on. "Offer your father a seat at your table tonight and from now on." He blinked hard. The chandelier came into his eyes and made the wet look almost festive. He didn't brush it away. He set the page down for a breath that wasn't quite steady. Is there more?" "2," Linda said. "You can read them, or you can choose not to. Both choices are choices." He lifted the page again like it might ask to be held. "Apologize to him here where you tried to hide him." He stopped. The words hung in the air like a door left open in winter. The jazz brushes outside paused and then circled back in polite as a neighbor clearing his throat. "You can prepare for failure. You know where the water goes when a line blows. You keep towels, pumps, fans. You can't prepare for mercy. It comes how it wants." Dan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He set the paper down as gently as you'd set a cracked plate you still love. His hands found the edge of the table. He had Mary's way of holding on when the room tilted. "Dad," he said, eyes on the linen. The maitre d' slipped in with a water pitcher and left without pouring. That kind of grace breaks a man more than anger. "You can finish the note," Linda said, not pushing. "Then we'll all be clear." He nodded once, twice. "If you can respect the people who keep the water running," he read slower now, each word placed like a tile. "I can trust you with my business." No speech then, no applause. Just the room adjusting to a new truth, like a foundation settling after a hard rain. I let a breath out. I hadn't realized I'd been hoarding. The private room smelled like pepper and butter, and something sharp from my cuffs primer that had dried hours ago, but still told on me. I pressed my hands flat to the table and looked at my son's hands steady now, palms open on either side of the paper, like he was warming them over a small fire. He turned his face toward me, dusted with that boyhood look again, the one he tried to keep for June baseball nights and forgotten for career fairs. Daddy said quiet enough that if you weren't listening, you might miss it. I'm sorry. Mary used to say some words are wrenches, you don't throw them, you hand them over. He'd managed to hand it without dropping it. I let it sit a second so we both could feel the weight. Okay, I said, plain as cold water. My voice came out even. We can fix what we can fix. Linda slid the contract packet to the center, set her pen on top, then turned the legal pad so the blank side faced her. Peter, she called, and he appeared like a man who'd been standing just far enough away to give people room to change. She signed on the flagged tabs with the care of someone who has signed many and still believes paper is a promise humans have to live. She tapped the folded note once more, an anchor touch. Dan, this is yours to keep, she said. Put it somewhere that isn't a drawer. He nodded. He didn't try to joke. That was new. He slid the note into the inside pocket where a man puts the thing he cannot afford to lose. Outside the private room, the jazz trio started, Someone to Watch Over Me, slow and warm. The maitre d' brought an extra chair without asking and set it beside Dan. He looked to Linda, who gave the smallest nod. He looked to me. Please, he said, simple as a door swung open, sit. I sat. The cushion sighed in the same note it had before, but the chair felt different. That's the trick with gravity, it measures more than weight. Peter set a glass in front of me he hadn't asked me to want. Water, no lemon, perfect. On the house, he said, which made me smile. Houses are never free. Someone always keeps the pipes from splitting. Emily texted Dan. His phone lit up and went dark. For years, I'd resented that glow because I didn't know what it pulled him toward. Now it looked like a lifeline he might use to call his life back. Linda didn't make a speech about culture or values or pillars. She slid one more paper across for Peter to notarize. You'll have a kickoff call Monday, she said, business again, which I respected. Implementation mid-quarter. We'll put out a joint note about the scholarship when it's set up. Quiet, not splashy. Thank you, Dan said, and meant all three words. He looked at me again. Dad. Eat something, I said. You'll make better promises. He huffed a laugh that sounded like the lid on an old valve giving up a little. He flagged a server, ordered 2 meatloaf plates, like he knew about the secret menu. He didn't ask if I wanted one. He knew. That's the other trick with plumbing. Once it flows, it usually keeps flowing until someone stupid shuts it off. We waited. The room breathed. The door to the kitchen swung and fell. I thought about Christmas Eve in Sharonville when I'd warmed my hands over a boiler and watched a foreman cry with the relief men save for after everyone else has left. When the plates came, steam curled up with a gravy smell that could heal a quarrel. Dan slid salt my way without my asking. I shook my head. Taste first, I said, the old dad line that had lived in our house longer than either of us. He smiled. He tasted. He nodded. For a minute, we were 2 McKennas at a table in a city that had held us both when we were thinner. Linda lifted her water in a small toast that didn't ask the room to witness anything it hadn't already seen. To the people who keep the heat on, she said. We touched glasses. The sound was ordinary and right. I didn't look at the note again. I didn't need to. It had already done its work. The rest apologies, checks, written shares offered would take time like sealing tape bedding into threads. The thing was started. And when you've been a plumber long enough, you learn to trust a good start. The meatloaf was hot enough to warn a man to slow down, which suited me. Dan ate like he was trying to outrun a feeling. He always had 2 speeds, hurry and sleep, and not much in between. The busser who'd held the light passed by with a tray. I caught his sleeve gently. What's your name, son? Marcus, he said, eyes bright the way young men's eyes are, before the world teaches them to keep the dimmer handy. You held that light right, I said. Most folks wave it like a moth and blind you. He grinned. I watch those pipe repair videos like at 2 in the morning. Don't tell Chef. Tell Chef, I said. Curiosity keeps kitchens from burning down. Linda watched the exchange with the kind of attention you can't fake. Peter came back with a thin folder and the quiet confidence of a man who knows where every valve is. He nodded to Dan. Our GC signed your MSAs. Congrats. Dan wiped his mouth with the deliberateness of someone trying not to look like a kid with a new bicycle. Thank you, he said, then added, we'll do right by you. He looked at me like he hoped I'd believe it before his boss needed to. Linda rested her elbows on the table, fingers steepled. Two things before we call it a night, she said. One, Marcus. She crooked a finger and the busser stopped, like he'd been waiting his whole life to be included. You want to shadow a real service call tomorrow? My team will cover your shift if Chef agrees. You'll ride along, observe, don't touch anything that bites. Marcus looked at Chef, who'd appeared at the doorway, with arms folded, eyes amused. Chef gave a slow nod that men give when they remember the person who once opened a door for them. He's yours after brunch, he said. Marcus made a small sound, almost like prayer. To Linda said, turning back to Dan. About that scholarship. My company will match your commission dollar for dollar to endow it up to 40 grand. Details Monday. Keep it quiet. This is not a billboard. Dan's eyes flickered like the thought hurt and helped at the same time. Yes, ma'am, he said. He glanced at me a little bashful. Dad will need to... we can set it up in Cincinnati State Foundation, I said. Talk to Brenda in development. She's got a jar of caramel candies on her desk and a bulldog statue that scares donors into being generous. It came out easier than I expected because maybe I'd been building it in my head since Mary's first envelope labeled someday. Linda checked her watch politely, then looked at Peter. Let's give these two a minute, she said, and they stepped away, the door left a hand's width open, as if the room itself was learning to breathe new. Dan got ahead of his manners. I'm sorry, he said again, softer. About earlier. About other times. He didn't list them. He didn't have to. Career Day Parents' Weekend, the time he'd asked me to drop him at the corner, so no one would see the van that smelled like primer and coffee. They lined up in my head like lengths of pipe you plan to connect without over-tightening. I took a bite to buy a second. The meatloaf tasted like somebody's church basement. Son, we all get taught the wrong lessons. Then we spend years unlearning them. Way of the world. He looked at the folded note peeking from his inside pocket. I didn't know how to stop thinking like rooms like this matter more than the people who keep the water in them. They matter, I said. The water in the rooms, they just don't tell the truth about a man. His hands do. He laughed through his nose, Mary's laugh, my rhythm. Emily will like that, he said. She always says my hands forget to do dishes. Her hands forgot to say that, to my face, I said, smiling, so he'd know I was teasing. He shook his head, a quick, embarrassed move. She's the better of us, he said. I told her to dress fancy tonight. She brought me a lint roller and said, or you could bring your father and make me proud. I told her this was complicated. He looked ashamed in a way that suggested he'd earned it. I was wrong. Complicated is what cowards call simple when they don't want to do it, I said, and then softened it with a nod. Took me 30 years to ask Mary's brother for help fixing our roof. Pride's a heavy ladder. The maitre d' returned like a ghost with 2 small bowls. Kitchen sending out the blackberry cobbler, he said. On the house. He grinned at me. And yes, sir, I know houses are never free. Smart man, I said. Before we could dig in, Dan's phone buzzed. Emily, the screen said, blooming blue like a tiny emergency you might want to answer for once. He held it up, a question in the air. Step out, I said. Tell her the truth. He slipped into the hall. I could see his outline in the frosted glass moving as he talked with his hands, something he'd copied from me and then resisted for 20 years. Linda's shadow paused beside his, then passed. The jazz trio pulled a melody into something sweet and familiar that I couldn't name but could feel. Marcus hovered again with the hopeful bravery of a kid about to ask for a job. Sir, he said in a quiet voice that tried to be professional, how do you know when to tighten a fitting more versus when to back it off and reseat it? You feel it, I said, but until you do, you count. I held up a finger. Finger tight. Second finger. Wrench snug. I pivoted my wrist in a ghost of the motion, then a hair. If it complains, back off and look at the ferrule. If you force it, it'll teach you a lesson with water. He nodded hard like a man tucking the word hair into a place he could find again. Thank you. Dan came back in with his face rearranged into something human. She's proud of me, he said, surprised like a thawed pipe hearing itself run again. She said to bring you by on Sunday for chili in the Bengals game. She's making cornbread. She apologized for not insisting I call you sooner. His voice did that half-cracked men hate. She said Mary would have liked her. She might at that, I said, and found myself glad. Linda returned with Peter and a signed copy for Dan's records. Business regained its balance. She stood, and the room rose with her habit and respect. "We have a warehouse audit at 8, she said. "I'll let you gentlemen finish." She shook my hand first because she understood how to close the right loop. "Mr. McKenna, thank you for keeping the heat on when it mattered." "My pleasure," I said, and meant it. "Your people keep trucks moving. That keeps grandmas in soup. It's a circle." She smiled with her eyes this time. "Yes, it is." They left. The door settled. The room grew smaller in a good way, like a kitchen after Thanksgiving, when it's just family and leftovers. Dan took out the folded note and set it on the table where the candle could see it. "I want to do this right," he said. "The scholarship, the ride-along, the apologies that aren't just words." He looked straight at me, which felt like a small miracle. "Could I go with you tomorrow just to watch? I'll carry whatever you say. I won't touch anything that bites." He'd used the same language Linda had used with Marcus. It fit him less neatly, but better than I expected. I thought about my Saturday list: Mrs. Voss's laundry valve, a soft spot near a water heater in Price Hill, a church kitchen faucet with a death rattle. "Yes," I said. "You're on lunch duty, and you listen more than you talk." He laughed, genuine now. "Copy that." We ate cobbler. The spoon clinked small truce against the bowl. The night pushed its cold forehead against the restaurant windows. When we stood to leave, Marcus slipped a folded receipt into my palm, his handwriting sweaty and careful. "A phone number. In case you have room for one more apprentice someday," he said, hope and fear braided together like wire in a conduit. "I'll call Monday," I said, not to be nice, to be useful. In the main room, a couple in their 70s stopped us. The woman touched my sleeve. "You look like a man we should thank," she said. "I don't know for what. Just thank you." Her husband nodded the nod of men who have replaced things quietly for 60 years. "Thank you for noticing," I said. It felt like church without the organ. We stepped into the alley. The city had that clean, wet smell it gets after a quick winter spit. My van sat where I'd left it, righteous in its rust. Dan walked to his car, then turned back and folded me into a hug before he could think better of it. He hadn't hugged me like that since he needed $5 to go to Kings Island. "See you at 8, he said into my shoulder. "Bring gloves," I said into his hair. He laughed. The sound went up into the night like breath on December air and vanished, leaving warmth behind. Saturday came on like old bones, slow at first, then all at once you start moving. The van heater wheezed out a dusty warmth that smelled like last winter and coffee. I'd packed the usual copper stubs, PEX coils, a milk crate of fittings, a roll of Teflon tape, 3 kinds of washers, a thermos. Mary bought me the year the Bengals broke my heart the first time. Dan showed up on time with gloves and a paper sack from Servitize, 2 pretzels, and a cinnamon roll he said was for morale. He wore boots that had never been scuffed and a coat that wanted to be admired. He looked cold and 10 years younger. "You ride up front," I said. "Tools right in back. That's the order." He grinned, gloved hands rubbing together. "Copy." Price Hill had that Saturday morning quiet that belongs to neighborhoods built when people still waved. Frost traced the chain-link fences like someone with a fine brush had been up before dawn. Our first stop was Mrs. Voss' laundry valve that wept into a rusted pan and a water heater that sounded like it was boiling marbles. She met us at the door in pink slippers and a sweater that had seen more Christmases than I had wrenches. "You're Mary's husband," she said like a benediction. "Folks in this city remember you in pairs." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "This is my son, Dan." She took him in with the quick scan old ladies use to measure a man's trouble. "You look like you could lift a heater," she said, half a dare, half a welcome. "He can," I said, "and he will." Downstairs, the basement air had that old house tang, damp concrete, hot dust, a whisper of detergent. The valve drip pinged a steady Morse code into the pan. Dan took the flashlight without being told and held it polite as a prayer. I showed him the packing nut on the stem, the way a quarter turn could sometimes coax grace without a full replacement, the signs when a man ought to stop pretending and swap the whole thing. He tried to hand me tools wrong, one first then better. "Open end 1/2 inch, I said. He brought a box end, learned the difference by feel when it bit wrong. We backed the stem, seated a new washer, snugged it finger snug hair. The drip quit. We waited and listened. Still dry. "Now the heater," I said, pressing a palm to the side and wincing at the percussion. "Sediment City. She'll sing until she learns a new song." We attached a hose, bled off the hot, let the water run chocolate brown and then clear. Dan kept a hand on the hose like it might snake. Feels like holding a stubborn dog, he said. Exactly like that, I said. You hold firm, you don't yank. Mrs. Voss brought down mugs of something that had been coffee once and now wanted to be kindness. How much do I owe, she asked, already fishing in a coin purse that had folded 1,000 receipts for tamales and mass cards. Put it toward your heat, I said. Invoice rides until April. She shook her head like a woman fighting decency with decency. Then you take pierogies, she said, chin set. From my freezer. You do not argue. We don't, Dan said quickly, learning the right theology. She bagged up pierogies like a sacrament. Back in the van, the heater wheezed alive again. Dan chewed his pretzel and stared out the windshield at a crow hopping on a wire. I didn't know. People just, lived like this. Quiet bravery. They always have, I said. Our job is to keep their bravery from getting mold. He nodded like a man filing a sentence for later. I called Brenda at Cincinnati State, he said, almost shy. Left a message. I'll call again Monday twice if I have to. Good, I said. Bring the note. Put it on her desk. Our next stop was St. Bartholomew's Church kitchen. The faucet had a death rattle, and the sprayer tried to baptize anybody who leaned wrong. The hall smelled like wax and old hymnals. In the kitchen, a woman named Joy stirred chili in a pot big enough to hold a toddler. Marcus showed up at the side door with a knit cap and the hope of a man not yet punished for it. Chef said yes, he said, bright and breathless. He said to tell you if I come back with fewer fingers, I'm paying for my own stitches. You will return with all issued parts, I said. Hold the light. Don't speak unless you've got a question worth words. He grinned and shut up. Dan stood out of the way, watching the way apprentices learn with their eyes first. We pulled the faucet, found the cartridge worn down to a suggestion of shape, replaced the sprayer hose whose O-ring had given up on hope sometime during Lent. Marcus asked exactly 3 questions, all of them good. He watched my hands. He watched Dan watch my hands. Joy slipped us bowls of chili we hadn't earned yet, and a plate of cornbread that tasted like farm summers. On the house, she said. Houses aren't free, I said, and she raised an eyebrow like a woman who'd heard that once and married the man anyway. After lunch, we did a quick call on a shotgun house where the tub spout coughed rusty sighs before it would behave. The owner was a nurse on night shift who called me sir 3 times and apologized for the mess nobody with night shifts has time to fix. Dan carried the toolbox like it contained something holy. Maybe it does. Between calls, the van settled into that ride-along rhythm. Men share a little music. More silence, the small talk that says I'm here without smothering. He asked about Harlan, about Mary, about the envelopes in the freezer. I told him about the bakery thank you and the box that shows up each Christmas with sugar and forgiveness inside. He told me his boss had already slacked a heart emoji and a nice save, and how that had felt both cheap and true. All right, I said. Final stop, big lesson, no tools. He blinked, no tools. Just your mouth, I said, harder than wrenches. We pulled up in Norwood at a brick duplex with a porch that leaned toward the sidewalk like it wanted to hear gossip. An old-timer named Joe sat on a milk crate stringing Christmas lights, even though it was February, because time is a circle when you're stubborn. I'd fought his kitchen drain for years. Today wasn't about the pipes. Joe, I said, this is my boy. Joe peered up, cigar stubbed but ready, the one with the tie. The same, I said. Joe pointed at the wonky downspout that had been our argument through 2 elections. Water gets in the basement because the elbow's wrong, he said. I told you I'd fix it. You did, I said, and when you're ready, we'll do it together. In the meantime, we moved the dehumidifier. It's okay to accept help. He snorted, made a face, and waved us off like men do when they've been seen. You want soup, he asked, which was his way of agreeing to nothing and everything. We took soup. It tasted like surrender. Back in the van, Dan leaned his head against the glass and watched the street move in slow, honest inches. It's all so small, he said, then corrected himself like a man learning to pick different words. No, it's all so close. Close is where the fixes live, I said. You can't stop a city from leaking. You can keep a room from drowning. His phone buzzed. He looked and didn't reach a choice, I noticed, and didn't praise. Brenda called back, he said after it stopped. She wants to meet Thursday. She sounded excited, like this mattered more than a photo op. It does, I said. Names on plaques matter to families who sit under them. He turned the folded note over in his pocket like a worry stone. I've been thinking about the line where she asked me to offer you a seat at my table. It felt ceremonial last night. Today it feels like plumbing. If I don't make room, pressure builds in the wrong places. Now you're talking union, I said. He laughed. We dropped Marcus at the restaurant with a handshake that belonged on a better week. Monday, I said. Bring a notebook. Bring questions. Leave your pride at the door. It tracks mud. Yes, sir, he said, and meant it the way boys do when they're trying on manhood and finding it fits. At dusk, we swung by Emily's place with pierogies, and the last of the chili joy had tucked in a quart container. She opened the door with flour on her cheek, and that alert kindness social media can't fake. Hi, Ray, she said. Not Mr. McKenna. Ray, I'm glad you came. Her living room had a Bengals blanket over the couch and a plant trying its best. The air smelled like onions and something baking. She handed me a beer without a speech and told Dan to take out the trash like he'd always lived there. He did it without pretending he'd planned to. Over meatloaf reheated and cornbread that had surrendered its last heat, we made a list for Thursday. Names, questions, the wording for the scholarship that would feel like a hand on a young shoulder instead of a plaque on a wall. Emily wrote neatly printing Ray McKenna Trade Scholarship at the top and then underlining hands that keep us going because she liked the way it sounded. We liked it too. Night came down hard and clean over Oakley. When I left, Dan walked me to the van. The cold put color in his face the way Cincinnati winters do. He looked at my hands. You ever think about retiring, he asked. Every February, I said. And then a sink sings a new song, and I want to see how it ends. He nodded like a man who'd found the edge of a decision he wasn't ready to look over. Monday, I'm telling my boss about the donation. Before she asks, he said, and I'm calling Joe about that downspout. I owe him a Saturday. You owe him a seat at a table, I said. Bring soup. He smiled. I will. The van heater gave me one last blast of breath that smelled like time. I pulled away slow. In the rear view, my boy stood at the curb and lifted a hand the way men do when they're learning it's safe to wave. Thursday at Cincinnati State smelled like floor wax and coffee that had been doing its best since dawn. Brenda from development stood behind a desk stacked with folders and a bulldog statue with a chipped ear that made it look like it had been in a fight it won. A glass jar of caramel candies glowed like amber under fluorescent lights. She wore a sweater with tiny cardinals on the cuffs and had the voice of a woman who says please and means now. You must be Ray, she said, holding my hand like she was borrowing strength. And you must be Dan. She kept our hands a beat longer than polite, then let go. We've got a little conference room and a big idea. Come on. The little conference room had a whiteboard that someone had scrubbed down to a ghost of old equations, and a tray of cookies that looked like apology and reward mixed together. On the table sat 3 folders, a brass plaque wrapped in paper, and a stack of forms with flag tabs, the universal language of people trying to make good things official. Brenda had already printed the scholarship name at the top of the template, Ray McKenna Trade Scholarship, and under it, in smaller type, hands that keep us going. Dan kept touching the inside pocket of his jacket, like a man checking for a passport. Linda's note sat there folded with a crease he treated like a seam you don't want to crack. Emily had insisted on coming. She carried a thermos of chili in her tote like a talisman and kissed Brenda on the cheek like old friends minutes after meeting. That's Emily for you, no time wasted on Gates once she's decided you belong. Park Logistics is matching the endowment, Brenda said, eyes bright. Miss Park asked if she could stop by to shake your hands. She promised not to make a speech. As if the air had heard its cue, Linda and Peter slipped in quiet as good mechanics. Linda wore a navy coat with the kind of cut that tells you she gets things hemmed. She shook my hand first, then Dan's, and put a small envelope in Brenda's palm. Match check, she said. Don't post. Do spend. Brenda grinned at the bulldog as if telling it to relax. We had this. We'll make the interest feed 2 students a year, she said, already multiplying in her head. Tuition, books, and a tool allowance. A man can't carry the trade without a decent set of wrenches. Marcus arrived 5 minutes late and out of breath, cap in hand. Chef had given him an hour. He looked at the forms like they were a mountain and then at me like he'd decided to climb anyway. Sir, he said, I brought a notebook. He had. The cover said, take the stairs. We signed. Dan slid his commission check across without a wince, which impressed me more than I let on. Brenda added a sticky note for accounting, match applied, thank you Park, then tucked everything into a folder that made it real. She saved the plaque for last, unwrapping it with ceremony and thrift ray. McKenna Trade Scholarship, hands that keep us going. The letters weren't fancy. They were true. Let's put it where the students walk past on the hard days, Brenda said. Near the vending machines. That's where decisions get made. We walked down a hallway lined with photos of graduates holding their first toolkits like newborns. A custodian with a cart paused, took us in, and nodded the nod of people who keep buildings alive. Brenda mounted the plaque with 2 screws Marcus held like diamonds. Dan steadied the bottom edge without being told. Peter used his thumbnail to peel the protective film. It came up in a single satisfying curl, the way tape behaves for you when you've finally earned a break. Say a few words, Brenda said, looking at me, if you want. I don't like microphones. They don't like me. I cleared my throat and kept it plain. Pipes don't care what you think you are, I said. They care if you respect the line and do the work. If this helps a kid buy his first set of nut drivers or keeps a mother in hot water after a night shift, that's enough. Thank you for letting our names sit where hands pass by. Applause rolled down the hall like distant thunder. It wasn't a crowd, just a handful of students and a professor with chalk on his sleeve, but it felt like a city nodding. Back in the conference room, Linda tapped the table once with her knuckle. You keep your end. We'll keep ours, she said to Dan. Monday at 9, kick off with my ops lead. Bring the version of yourself that read the note like he meant it. She shook my hand, then Marcus's, then Brenda's bulldog for luck, because she's the kind of person who understands to bless the totems that guard the right doors. After they left, Dan sank into a chair and blew out a breath that had been aging since high school. I told my boss this morning, he said. She said I'd lost my mind and then said I'd gained a client. She wants to talk to Emily about how to keep me from being a fool as a habit. He smiled sideways. I told her we were working on that. We spent the afternoon doing what looks small from far away and large up close, calling Mrs. Voss to check for drips, texting Joe a photo of a downspout elbow circled in red, emailing Brenda the language Dan and Emily had drafted about the tool allowance. Emily insisted on adding one sentence recipients will ride along at least one Saturday per term and signed it Emily who loves cornbread as a joke that made Brenda snort laugh into her sweater cuff. That Sunday, we carried chili to Emily's and watched the Bengals with our feet on the same ottoman, which is as close to forgiveness as a Cincinnati man needs to get. At halftime, Dan read the note again, quiet, no drama, and folded it back into his pocket like a map he wasn't done with. When we left, Emily hugged me the way Mary used to hug me when the van limped through February, fully like it mattered. The week ran. Park Logistics sent over a kickoff deck that used fewer buzzwords than I'd feared. Dan called Marcus and set up a Saturday. I fixed a tub spout that had been sighing since Carter and a boiler that had gone sullen when the weather turned. At St. Bartholomew's, the kitchen sprayer behaved like it had learned manners. Joy pressed leftover cookies into my hands and told me to stop looking surprised when people insisted on paying in bread. On Friday, I stopped by the Walnut and Rye to check Table 12's line. The maitre d' met me with a grin and a towel thrown over his shoulder like a flag. Dry as a good martini, he said. Chef sent out a slice of blackberry cobbler and rolled his eyes when I pointed at it and said, "The house," he said, "the kitchen," and I let him win. As I left, an older couple took my sleeve, maybe the same two from that night, maybe not. The woman's perfume smelled like something that had been popular when we all danced more. "You look like a man we should thank," she said again. It wasn't déjà vu, it was community. I nodded and told them to have the meatloaf because we only live once and twice on Sundays. The call came from Brenda that afternoon. "We've got our first 2 applicants already," she said, thrilled. "One's a single mom who can fix a washing machine by listening. One's a kid who hates desks and loves mornings. We'll start them in March." I stood by the van with the phone against my ear and let the news sink into my bones the way heat soaks into a cold hand. Mary would have liked this. She would have bought caramel candies she didn't need just to say thank you heavier. That night, Dan and I met at the Walnut and Rye bar for meatloaf like we'd talked about in that first bright aftermath. The hostess smiled and set 2 glasses down without asking. The jazz trio worked an old standard into something honest. Dan took out the note and set it between us for a second, not to show off, just to remember. "I did what it said," he said. "Not because I had to, because I wanted to." "Good," I said. Now keep doing it on days when nobody's watching. That's how pipes hold. He nodded, eyes steady. I'm learning. He tapped the paper once, then slid it back into his pocket. I want to keep this until it falls apart. Then I want to know it by heart. We ate, talked about nothing, which is to say everything. When the check came, the maitre d' had written a line at the bottom in a neat hand. Thank you for keeping the heat on. It wasn't a billboard, it was better. I don't know if this is what revenge is supposed to feel like. It didn't feel like payback. It felt like pressure releasing from a line that had been humming for years, like a house exhaling when the furnace kicks on after the first hard freeze. I don't think I beat anyone. I think we turned a valve. If you've listened this far, if you've made it through the drips and the tightenings and the small repairs, maybe you know somebody who needs a seat at your table. Maybe you're the one who needs to pull up a chair. If this story meant something, share it with a friend who works with their hands or with someone who needs to remember where heat comes from. Subscribe if you want more stories about ordinary folks keeping the water running. And if you ever meet the person who saved your Christmas stand-up, shake their hand and say it plain.